If you feel like time is slipping through your fingers, you're not alone. If you've been waking up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying days that feel heavy with noise, this story is for you. Because what we call aging might not be about getting older at all. It might be about forgetting how to stay alive. So before we go further, before we descend into the unraveling of what it means to grow old, ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly present inside your own life? If you can't remember, this isn't a lecture. It's a hand, offered slowly, without judgment. So if any part of you is ready to return to yourself, even just a little hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment, not for me, but for you. Say something honest, something only you would know. This is Silent Sage Stories. And what you're about to hear isn't content. It's a mirror, held quietly, until you recognize yourself again. There's a story we've all been told, that aging is what happens when the years add up. That lines on the face mean time has passed, and stiffness in the joints means we're slowly becoming less. But what if that story is wrong? What if aging isn't about the passage of time, but about the accumulation of forgetfulness? We forget to stretch, to breathe, to forgive. We forget to speak gently to ourselves. We forget to look up, and slowly, quietly, we begin to wither, not from age, but from absence, because it's not time that erodes us. It's the life we refuse to live. There are people in their 30s who already feel brittle, not because they're old, but because they're tired, exhausted from chasing, comparing, consuming. They carry a weariness not born from decades, but from disconnection, from themselves, from the moment, from the body they no longer inhabit with reverence. And then there are those in their 70s who move with grace, who speak slowly and mean every word, who walk like the earth belongs to them, not from pride, but from presence. So perhaps aging isn't linear. Perhaps it's a moral condition, not a chronological one. And if that's true, then the cure has never been youth. It's been something else entirely. The Stoics, long before us, understood this. They watched the body change, but did not flinch, because they did not anchor identity to the body. They anchored it to the soul's posture. And that posture, they said, was built upon three things: self-control, discipline, presence, not as punishments, but as forms of intimacy. You do not restrain your appetite to be virtuous. You do it so you can feel the body again. You do not wake early to impress a calendar. You do it to meet the sun in silence. You do not sit in stillness for applause. You do it to remember that you are not your thoughts. You are the space that holds them. That's what the Stoics meant. That's what we've forgotten. And so we age. Not because we grow older, but because we stop tending to the garden of the self. Neglect is a kind of decay, a subtle one, but relentless. It begins with little things. You stop cooking real food. You stop stretching in the morning. You start rushing through conversations. You say yes when your body says no. You carry your phone into the bathroom, into bed, into prayer, and soon you're not living. You're reacting. You're managing a body you've grown estranged from. You're tending to a mind that no longer listens because it's never been listened to. So you chase dopamine. You scroll. You shop. You distract. And you call that life. But deep down, something aches. Not because you're old, but because you're adrift. And aging, real aging, is simply what happens when you stay adrift long enough. But here's the miracle. You can turn back. You can re-inhabit yourself, not with creams or pills, but with attention, slow attention. You can begin again by drinking water as if it matters, by breathing before you speak, by going outside without needing a reason, by touching your own hand like it belongs to someone you care about. You can start with the smallest vow today: I will not abandon myself. You can write it on your mirror. You can whisper it in the dark. You can say it again when you forget, and you will forget. But forgetting is not failure. It's just another invitation to return. And with each return, something happens. You soften. You see more clearly. You feel more deeply. You become less brittle and more alive. Time does not stop, but it begins to work with you instead of against you, because time was never the enemy. It was always waiting for you to wake up. So maybe you are not aging. Maybe you are just being called to remember, to slow down, to pay attention, to keep the contract with your own life. You are listening to Silent Sage Stories, where growing older is not a problem, but a practice. So maybe you are not aging. Maybe you are just being called to remember, to slow down, to pay attention, to keep the contract with your own life. If this story has stirred something in you, a stillness, a question, a longing, I invite you to sit with it a while. And if you'd like more spaces like this, where silence is honored and depth is welcome, you can quietly support this channel. A like, a share, a subscription. Each one is a soft candle in the dark, letting others know they're not alone in their seeking. Now, let us go deeper, because in part 2, we'll begin with the first Stoic pillar, self-control, not as repression, but as liberation. a way to return to the body without fear, to hunger without shame, to desire without losing ourselves. The practice continues. I'll meet you there. There's a hunger inside us, not for food, not even for pleasure, but for sovereignty. The quiet ache to belong to ourselves again, to not be pulled by every craving, pushed by every impulse, or dragged by every mood. We want to feel steady, rooted, unshaken. But modern life makes that feel impossible, because everywhere we look, something is calling us outward. Buy this, taste that, react now, scroll more. And each time we answer, we step a little further away from our own center. The Stoics didn't speak of self-control as some grim form of restriction. They saw it as freedom. True self-control isn't about suppression. It's about possession. You cannot control a life you are not inside of. You cannot lead a mind you constantly escape. So they taught, guard the gate of your attention. Tend the landscape of your reactions. Don't be mastered by emotion, but don't flee from it either. Instead, learn to sit with it, like a teacher, like a storm, like a child crying to be heard, not obeyed. Because when anger rises and you do not lash out, that is strength. When desire whispers and you do not chase, that is peace. When fear tightens your chest and you do not run, that is presence. And this is where youth is preserved. Not in the absence of stress, but in the refusal to be ruled by it. Think of your energy as a vessel. Every reaction that bursts forth, unexamined, spills something from that cup. Every indulgence that feels good now, but leaves you hollow, later, it drains you, not just physically, but spiritually. And over time, you start to feel it. The irritability, the fatigue, the vague sense that life is running you instead of the other way around. This is aging too, the slow leak of power, because the reins were handed over to habit. But what if you took them back, not all at once, not perfectly, but patiently? What if you practiced pausing right before the click, the bite, the snap, the sigh, just long enough to ask, is this choice in alignment with the person I wish to become? That one question can reroute an entire life, because self-control is not the enemy of joy. It is what makes true joy possible. The kind that isn't followed by shame. The kind that doesn't demand a refund. The kind that feels like integrity because it was chosen, not chased. You do not need to become a monk. You only need to become a steward of your time, your thoughts, your urges. And it will be hard, because everything around you is designed to bypass reflection and reward reaction. But you are not everything around you. You are stillness disguised as motion. You are clarity covered in noise. And every time you resist the pull, you return to that stillness. You sharpen that clarity, and slowly, so slowly, you begin to feel young again. Not because you have more energy, but because you are no longer hemorrhaging it. Not because life is easier, but because you are anchored. The Stoics called it ataraxia, a kind of inner tranquility that cannot be disturbed by fortune or misfortune. It isn't born from controlling the world. It is born from no longer needing to, because you trust yourself, not to be perfect, but to be awake, to pause, to choose, to return. That is self-control. And it is not a cage. It is a compass. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where restraint becomes a form of reverence and aging becomes a slower kind of storm. Discipline. It's a word that often feels called sharp, rigid, like something imposed from the outside. But real discipline is an act of devotion, not to rules, not to performance, but to the parts of yourself that are quietly asking for structure. Discipline is how we keep a promise to the version of ourselves we haven't become yet, but long to. And it's never loud. It shows up in the early morning before the sun does. In the way you make your bed, not because anyone will see, but because you will. It's in the way you move your body, even when it's tired, not to punish it, but to stay in conversation with it. It's in the way you say no to the fifth scroll, the second drink, the easy escape, because you remember what you're building and who. But that remembering takes practice. The world tells you to follow your feelings, and feelings are important, but they are weather, not anchors. Discipline is not the denial of emotion. It's the integration of it. You feel the resistance. You meet it, and you still move. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because you're guiding yourself. There's a difference. Force breaks. Guidance builds. Think of discipline like tending a fire. Too much intensity, and it burns everything. Too little, and it goes out. But just enough, and it becomes warmth, light, sustenance. The Stoics didn't wake early fast often and write in journals because they enjoyed deprivation. They did it because they understood the fragility of attention, and they knew. Routine is how the soul learns to feel safe. It's not just a schedule. It's a ritual, a scaffolding. And when you practice it with care, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust yourself, because each act of discipline is a vote for the person you say you are. It doesn't have to be heroic. In fact, the quietest forms are often the most powerful. Drinking water before coffee. Turning your phone off an hour earlier. Finishing the task even when no one's watching. sitting with a difficult emotion instead of running from it. Every time you choose the deeper path over the easier one, you make your life more honest. Not easier, but clearer, and with clarity comes peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from things going right, but the kind that lives inside you, even when everything doesn't, because you are no longer at war with your own intentions. You are aligned. That alignment is where youth is preserved, not because your body stops aging, but because your spirit stops decaying. Without discipline, we grow brittle, reactive, impatient with ourselves, and life begins to feel noisy because we've lost our rhythm. But with it, life becomes quieter, even when hard, because we are no longer drifting. We are walking, one small act at a time, one repetition, one breath, one meal cooked with care, one difficult choice made with tenderness. And these choices, they add up. They compound. They become the architecture of a life well lived. The Stoics didn't fear death. They feared living carelessly. And so they built lives that would age gracefully, not because they were easy, but because they were intentional. You can do the same today, right now. You don't need a plan. You don't need motivation. You need only one small thing you will do faithfully, even when you don't feel like it, even when no one claps, because in that act, you return to yourself. You grow stronger, not in muscle, but in soul. And that is the kind of strength time cannot touch. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where discipline isn't punishment, it's poetry. There's a silence you've been avoiding. It waits for you in the space between tasks, in the pause between notifications, in the breath between thoughts. But you rarely hear it, because you rarely stop long enough to notice it's still there. Presence is not something we learn. It's something we remember, a way of being we once knew before the calendar, before the pressure, before we believed being useful was the same as being alive. When did you last feel the world without interpreting it? When did you last sit in a chair without checking anything? When did you last look at a tree and let it speak? Most of the time, we are not really here. We are replaying or rehearsing. We are defending or distracting. We are anywhere but now. And the tragedy is, life only ever happens here. The Stoics knew this. They were warriors, not of action, but of attention. They understood that the mind untethered becomes a prison, and so they trained it, not to obey, but to return. Return to the breath, to the moment, to the only place where wisdom can land. Because truth doesn't arrive in noise. It waits in stillness. But stillness takes courage. It means facing what rises when you stop running. It means noticing how loud your inner world has become, and how long it's been since you just sat and allowed yourself to exist without fixing anything. Presence is not a tool. It is a homecoming. It is the quiet realization that this very second is your real life, not what comes later, not what just happened, not what you wish would be. This, the sound of your breath, the weight of your body in the chair, the faint hum in the room. This is what you've been missing, and the grief of that realization can be overwhelming. To see how many meals you've eaten without tasting, how many conversations you have heard, how many days slipped by while you were elsewhere. But grief is not a punishment. It is a doorway, because once you see what you've lost, you can choose to return. Not all at once, not perfectly, but tenderly. You start by putting the phone down. You light a candle with no reason. You sip water and let it be sacred. You pause mid-sentence to listen more deeply, and something shifts, not loud, not dramatic, but enough. You begin to feel the moment soften around you. Time expands. The body unclenches. The heart grows quiet. This is what it means to be young again, not because the clock reversed, but because you did. You stopped running. You came back, and the world welcomed you. Not with fireworks, but with gentleness, a breeze against your skin, the sound of a bird, the taste of fruit. These things have always been here. You just weren't, and that's okay. You're here now. The Stoics would not tell you to meditate. They would tell you to pay attention, to walk with awareness, to eat with gratitude, to speak with care, to look, really look, at the face of someone you love. Because presence is not a technique, it is reverence. It's the difference between using time and being with it. And when you are with it, life stops feeling like a blur. It becomes textured, dimensional, real. Even the pain, even the boredom, even the longing, it all becomes part of the moment instead of something to escape. You become whole again, not because you've fixed yourself, but because you've stopped splitting from what is. That's the secret no one tells you. Presence doesn't change your life. It lets you finally enter it. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where being here is enough. 3 pillars: self-control, discipline, presence. Each one powerful on its own. But together, they form something larger, a kind of ecosystem, an internal architecture, a quiet order of being, not rigid, but rooted, not perfect, but alive. Self-control is the gatekeeper. It protects. It pauses. It chooses not to be ruled by noise. Discipline is the builder. It repeats. It honors rhythm. It lays bricks one by one, even when no one claps. Presence is the witness. It sees. It softens. It receives the moment as it is, not as we wish it to be. And when they move together, not as rules, but as a rhythm, something inside us recalibrates. We stop bracing against life. We start living into it, not rushing, not retreating, just steady, just open. Aging in this rhythm becomes something different, not decline, but refinement. The body may slow, the skin may fold, but the spirit sharpens, the gaze deepens, the laughter grows warmer. This is not the result of magic. It is the result of alignment, when your actions match your values, when your breath matches your pace, when your days begin to carry a signature that feels unmistakably yours. There is nothing accidental about a well-lived life. There is only attention, repetition, grace, and yes, you will fall out of rhythm. We all do. The impulse will return. The distraction will beckon. The schedule will collapse. But that's not failure. That's life reminding you to begin again, to return to the breath, to the choice, to the moment, again and again, until the rhythm becomes second nature. And once it does, time begins to treat you differently. You no longer feel chased. You no longer feel behind. You no longer dread the future or regret the past, because your days, even the difficult ones, feel inhabited, not perfect, but full. And fullness, not youth, is the opposite of aging. You begin to see aging not as loss, but as concentration, like tea steeped longer, like wood darkening with time. You lose the excess. You keep the essence. The need to prove dissolves. The need to rush quiets. What remains is something slower, something steadier, something sacred. And it all begins with 3 quiet decisions. To pause before reacting. To stay faithful to what matters. To pay attention. That's all. No program. No secret. No performance. Just a way of living that says, I will not abandon myself to speed, to ease, to noise. I will live deliberately, repeatedly, presently. And in doing so, I will grow older, but I will not grow lost. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where aging is not the end of youth, but the deepening of presence. Some nights, you don't feel old. You just feel further away from something or someone, or maybe just yourself. You sit on the edge of your vow, and it takes longer than usual to stand back up. You forget the name of a street you used to drive through every day. You run into an old friend and don't recognize your voice when you speak. It's softer now, not out of peace, but out of fatigue. You're not sure when it happened, this shift from hunger to hesitation. There was a time you wanted everything. Now you just want the day to pass gently. And no one told you how quiet this would be. No warning that the sharpness would dull, that even joy would need more effort. You used to laugh with your whole body. Now your laughter is something you mostly watch. And still you smile. You do your work. You answer kindly. But underneath a question forms. You don't know how to ask. Am I still in here? Not the adult, not the functioning self, but the one who once walked barefoot without looking down. The one who cried watching clouds move. The one who believed people were poems, not patterns. Where did that one go? And why is it so hard to call them back? You don't feel broken. You just feel like a house where someone used to live with music on. Now, it's clean. It's quiet. It's fine. But something hums in the walls. A memory. A longing. A voice that says, "You left me behind when you got so good at surviving." And maybe that's what aging is. Not the loss of youth, but the loss of places inside you that no longer get visited. Rooms that stay locked. Drawers you don't open. Letters you no longer write because you don't know who would read them. But tonight you pause, not because anything changes. Not because you found the answer, just because the ache feels more honest than pretending not to feel it. And in that pause, you hear it again. That small voice you buried under years of doing. It doesn't say much. It never did. It just asks, "Are you still with me?" And maybe that's enough. To feel it again, to remember, to not run away. Not this time. You sit a little longer. You breathe without fixing. You let the room be what it is, and yourself too, because maybe you're not fading. Maybe you're just starting to feel how precious it always was. To be here, to be soft, to be whole, even while unraveling. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where aging isn't something we fight, but something we listen to until it tells us what we still carry in silence. Maybe nothing needs to be fixed. Maybe the body slows because it's supposed to. Because stillness was never a symptom, but a signal that it's time to stop outrunning yourself. Maybe the forgetting isn't failure. Maybe it's clearing, making room for something quieter to take root. A kind of knowing that doesn't need to be loud, that doesn't need to explain itself, just lives in you, like a breath you stopped noticing. Maybe this is what growing older was always meant to be, a return, not to youth, but to presence, to rhythm, to a deeper kind of honesty about what matters and what never did. You stop measuring. You stop striving. You start sitting longer. You let others speak first. You laugh slower. You cry softer. You reach for fewer things, but with more care. You take walks, not for steps, just for the walking. You lose the urge to win. You lose the fear of being behind, because suddenly, you're no longer rushing toward life. You're inside it, fully, gently, finally. And maybe, just maybe, this is not about aging at all. Maybe this is about becoming who you were before the noise, before the proving, before the armor. Maybe the lines on your face aren't time passing, but you arriving. You who feels more now, who sees more now, who needs less, but gives more. You who still carries wonder, even if it hides beneath fatigue. You who remembers what silence feels like before sleep, and knows without question that there is nothing wrong with you, that this softening is not collapse, but completion. You were never meant to stay sharp forever. You were meant to deepen, to glow from the inside, to feel things that youth could never name. And so maybe now, as the world turns faster, you choose to turn inward, to walk slower, to speak clearer, to mean it, all of it. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where time does not take you away, it brings you home. There's a story we've all been told, that aging is what happens when the years add up. That lines on the face mean time has passed, and stiffness in the joints means we're slowly becoming less. But what if that story is wrong? What if aging isn't about the passage of time, but about the accumulation of forgetfulness? We forget to stretch, to breathe, to forgive. We forget to speak gently to ourselves. We forget to look up and slowly, quietly, we begin to wither, not from age, but from absence, because it's not time that erodes us. It's the life we refuse to live. There are people in their 30s who already feel brittle, not because they're old, but because they're tired, exhausted from chasing, comparing, consuming. They carry a weariness not born from decades, but from disconnection, from themselves, from the moment, from the body they no longer inhabit with reverence. And then there are those in their 70s who move with grace, who speak slowly and mean every word, who walk like the earth belongs to them, not from pride, but from presence. So perhaps aging isn't linear. Perhaps it's a moral condition, not a chronological one. And if that's true, then the cure has never been youth. It's been something else entirely. The Stoics, long before us, understood this. They watched the body change, but did not flinch, because they did not anchor identity to the body. They anchored it to the soul's posture. And that posture, they said, was built upon 3 things: self-control, discipline, presence, not as punishments, but as forms of intimacy. You do not restrain your appetite to be virtuous. You do it so you can feel the body again. You do not wake early to impress a calendar. You do it to meet the sun in silence. You do not sit in stillness for applause. You do it to remember that you are not your thoughts. You are the space that holds them. That's what the Stoics meant. That's what we've forgotten. And so we age, not because we grow older, but because we stop tending to the garden of the self. Neglect is a kind of decay, a subtle one, but relentless. It begins with little things. You stop cooking real food. You stop stretching in the morning. You start rushing through conversations. You say yes when your body says no. You carry your phone into the bathroom, into bed, into prayer, and soon you're not living. You're reacting. You're managing a body you've grown estranged from. You're tending to a mind that no longer listens because it's never been listened to. So you chase dopamine, you scroll, you shop, you distract, and you call that life. But deep down, something aches, not because you're old, but because you're adrift. And aging, real aging, is simply what happens when you stay adrift long enough. But here's the miracle. You can turn back. You can re-inhabit yourself, not with creams or pills, but with attention, slow attention. You can begin again by drinking water as if it matters, by breathing before you speak, by going outside without needing a reason, by touching your own hand like it belongs to someone you care about. You can start with the smallest vow. Today, I will not abandon myself. You can write it on your mirror. You can whisper it in the dark. You can say it again when you forget, and you will forget. But forgetting is not failure. It's just another invitation to return. And with each return, something happens. You soften. You see more clearly. You feel more deeply. You become less brittle and more alive. Time does not stop, but it begins to work with you instead of against you, because time was never the enemy. It was always waiting for you to wake up. So maybe you are not aging. Maybe you are just being called to remember, to slow down, to pay attention, to keep the contract with your own life. You're listening to Silent Sage Stories, where growing older is not a problem, but a practice. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for listening, but for staying present. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment, not to comment, not to share, just to breathe. Place a hand over your chest and whisper, I'm still here. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, not out of obligation, but as a small vow to stay close to what feels real. From my quiet corner to yours. Thank you for walking with me. May you age gently. May you return often. And may you never forget you are still becoming. This was Silent Sage Stories, where time doesn't take you away, it brings you home.